Welcome to the Designing Hollywood podcast in association with the John Campea Show. I am your host, Robert Meyer Burnett, and this episode is sponsored by Paris Costumes. Today's returning guest is an Emmy-winning, groundbreaking costume designer and stylist based in Los Angeles. She's best known for her brilliant and unique style eye, which she uses to develop inspiring image of modern-day independent women and men, as well as fantastical characters taken from the pages of a book to a binge-worthy series. Whether she's bringing to life a character off the page of a script or styling a celebrity, she is inspired by the spirit of every persona to create a cohesive look that resonates with each individual. Her eye-catching designs for the second and third season of Netflix's Emmy-nominated series LEMONY, SNICKET'S, A Series of Unfortunate Events, starring Neil Patrick Harris, have won 5 awards and were nominated for Costume Designers Guild Awards as well as 2 Primetime Emmys in Outstanding Fantasy and Sci Fi Costumes. She was also nominated for a 2021 Costume Designers Guild Award for Excellence in Sci-Fi Fantasy Television for TNT's Snowpiercer. Some of her other credits include Netflix's cyberpunk noir sci-fi series Altered Carbon, The L Word, Fox's Emmy-winning series Bones, and in addition, she created the prequel Cadet Academy world of Halo for Microsoft's series adaptation of Halo 4, Forward Unto Dawn. Her film work includes Beautiful Boy, Apollo 18, The Show, and I have to mention Jet Li and Jason Statham in War. And she has just wrapped on HBO's highly acclaimed adaptation of The Last of Us, created by Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann, starring Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey. It is our great honor, and without further ado, to welcome back Cynthia Summers to the Designing Hollywood podcast. Cynthia, it's so great to meet you. Thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure. I'm so happy to be here, and nice to meet you as well.
I asked you before we started. I heard that you grew up in Vancouver, BC, and I'm a Seattleite, so I've always thought of like Vancouver's kind of a home away from home. I've worked on films up there, and I find that, I mean, maybe it's because growing up, Seattle had a big contingent of science fiction, fantasy, and horror fans. And I look at your credit list, and I have to ask you, do you have an affinity for sci-fi, fantasy, and horror? Because you've worked on many great sci-fi, fantasy, and horror properties.
You know, it just turned out that way, to be honest. To be brutally honest, it's kind of like, I think for a lot of us, our careers, in whatever we're doing to some degree, you start off with an idea of where you want to be and when you think you want to do, and for somehow the path just takes you over here or over there, and then you settle in a place and suddenly you're doing something else. And I feel like that's a large part of what's happened to me in my career, and I'm actually really thankful for it because it keeps it really fresh. But a lot of it lately, I'd say within the last 10 years, has definitely been leaning closer to the sci-fi fantasy.
Yeah, well, obviously, I think for a costume designer, that affords you a lot of opportunity to get crazy, design things that aren't part of the real world, so to speak.
Yeah.
So, well, I have to ask you, did you grow up, were you a fan? Did you want to get into costume design or fashion from the beginning? How'd you find your way into the profession?
Yeah. Also by default. I feel like my whole life is by default. I was a dancer, and that was my first inception of adulthood. I was a dancer, and theater and dance is still probably one of the most underfunded of the creative arts, I think, anywhere in the world, really, and any stage production. And so I always had an affinity for sewing and creating costumes, taught to me by my mother. And I just, being an artist, I would have to do repairs on my own costumes, repairs on other people's costumes, which led to building, maybe adding things, maybe getting a bit more exciting with something. Maybe someone sees it and likes it and thinks, oh, well, let's actually add that on the next go around. And so that sort of evolved that way. And then after years of doing that, And starting a family, I was not dancing anymore. So that segued into actually creating costumes. And then I had the opportunity to work on, I feel like I tell the story all the time. I had an opportunity to work on a film creating some ballet tutus for some characters in a real unconventional scene. And I was just captivated by the whole process of film. The whole process from like driving into base camp to getting to the set and seeing it all performing and happening, and how costumes work on bodies when they're moving. And that's basically where I started. And then I kind of bugged a production designer very nicely for about a year. And he got an indie and said, "Do you want to do it?" And I said, yes. And that was the beginning. I had no idea what I was doing, like not a clue. Not a clue. But I want to say that I made some really, really important and wonderful and life-lasting relationships there. And to this day, in fact, on The Last of Us, I was working with a producer who I met in that very first film.
You're kidding.
No.
See, kids, you never know
Yeah.
where you're going to wind up.
Yeah. And my set supervisor, Steve, met me on that first film, and he showed up one day and said, "I will work for free." And I said, "Yes, you will." And he's still working with me as well to this day, also on The Last of Us.
So are you entirely self-taught, or did you have any academic background at all?
You know, I was self-taught to the point of the business I created as a dance costume business. It kind of got bigger than me, so I had to make the decision to expand or not, or move on to something else. So I decided at that point to go to fashion design school to see if there were any tricks or contacts or anything that would enhance what I was doing and help me make the decision. And so that's where I achieved my academia in costume, but it was actually fashion design. So, and then I just jumped right in, and I think probably self-taught is the right, description of my career. And I think though that applies to so much in film, because even when we know what we're doing and we're working in a certain genre, and then you move to a different genre, a lot of times we're just always still learning. And film changes so much, and the technology of film, everything, as we know, with HD and then now HDR, has became so much more magnified and finite, and so everything shows up. So we were talking a little bit about actors. So skin, any little blemish becomes like a mountain on your face. Basically, that's all you see coming at you. And for costume, it changed the colors we could use, or the tone of the colors. Black became like a dense black hole. Like you could just not get any definition out of black. It was, I kind of look like it now, but there'd be no, shadows or anything.
Right. No detail.
No detail. All the details lost. Oh, and the opposite applies to things like a herringbone print or a check or a stripe. They just, and it was really hard to tell. You would have to camera test everything because historically a small black and white stripe would be terrible. And usually a wider stripe would be terrible. And sometimes it's the black on white or the white on black. I mean, you just didn't know. You really had to camera test everything. And to this day, for television especially, things like herringbone prints or really like different kinds of checks that sort of overlap each other, they're terrible. They just moire, they move around on the screen, and there's really nothing you can do about it. So a lot of times we would try to do things like over dye or tech, do a heavy tech to sort of tone it down, tone the contrast down so that things might stop moving around. But it really comes down to each piece of fabric you use and where it is on the body and how close it gets to camera or how much it moves around. Like it's really, so you really just wind up not using it at all, which is very sad. and how do you tell history if you don't have that specific kind of fabric? So you have to be creative.
Now, when you were growing up, I know you worked in dance, but were you a film fan? Did you watch film and TV growing up? And did you have influences? You had favorite movies or favorite costumes
Yeah,
or things that were touchstones for you?
for sure. And what's very strange is where I've wound up in sort of the last 6 to 10 years in sci-fi. I loved period costume. I think that's that was the fantasy for me. And I remember when I want to say I was 6 years old. My mother took me to Dr. Zhivago,
Okay.
the movie that a lot of the listeners are not going to know what that is. As the movie, perhaps because they're too young, but I was captivated by that movie, and the bleak Russian front and the snow drifts and Omar Sharif.
Oh, yeah.
Totally enchanted with Omar Sharif and Julie Christie. I think
Yeah.
it was Julie Christie. Yeah, and just that was like, so it wasn't. I mean, before that, sure, it was when I was little. It was like My Friend Flicka and all the horse Disney programs, and yes, the princesses and things like that, typical of my generation, and what was available for me to watch then as a child. But I just that Dr. Zhivago was like it for me. I just wanted to know where that was and who they were, and the fur, which of course I don't have anything to do with animal products anymore, but just the whole periodness of it, the otherworldness of it is what really captivated me for film.
So when you started costume designing, like what kind of dance did you do? Was it ballet? Was it jazz? Was it?
Yeah, it was all of that, but segued more into like modern dance.
Modern dance.
So Martha Graham and
Sure.
all of that sort of stuff. So it could be like a lot of big flowing skirts and things like that. That was sort of her style, which again, the movement of fabric, and I mean, jazz is so much fun.
Sure.
Jazz is really fun, but jazz is more about the actual dance, whereas things like modern dance can be, it's about the body movement, but there's usually more fabric involved or less, like none at all. But there can be the use of fabric, and that sort of thing really captivated me, how the fabric moved.
That's what I was going to ask you. You started realizing which fabrics moved across the body. I mean, there's no better way than dance to see how that works.
Exactly. You're exactly right. And I think also dance really, because you have a really, the body gets articulated in certain ways, and the fabric wraps around bodies when they move, and what unwraps well and what doesn't unwrap well, and what fabric sort of takes on its own life or adds to the dance and the dancer. All those things really captivated me, and I learned a lot from dance, because you learn how fabrics move. A lot of stretch fabrics are used in modern dance. Some of them are great, some of them are horrible, and so it was a big lesson, and it really spurred me on to want to know fabric science and how to dye and how things move if you distress them, or if you pull one string and one thread out, what happens to the fabric, how it frays, how things ombre. I love ombre. Ombre's my thing. So yeah, that really was a really great education for me in creation.
Well, I just look at your credits, and you have designed spacesuits, and you've designed superhero costumes. Hey, the Tomorrow People, martial arts. You've worked on so many different genres, and then of course you've dealt with shows that deal with subcultures like The L Word, which also had a great style. There's people always talked about Sex in the City, and I didn't know what Manolo Blahniks were until I watched that show. But the L Word also had a great sense of style. I really loved the way you dressed the characters in that show, and there was a lot of panache there, and I liked all of that. And I think that really it's in your work. You can really see that you have a great sense of not only fantasy work, but I love your take on modern life as well, which I think is terrific.
Thank you.
Because you did work on things like A Girlfriend's Guide to Divorce, which is something that I watched.
Yeah. That was like my second L Word.
Right.
Second L Word, slightly different genre, or different.
But then doing Altered Carbon and Snowpiercer, pretty close together. I mean, those are, again, you're dealing with future dystopias and cyberpunk and that kind of thing. I mean, it's interesting how you would jump around. Did you find it difficult to do that, to go from doing something like L Word, but then jumping ahead and doing, our future and Altered Carbon?
Yeah, I mean, yes, but therein lies the challenge, and therein lies the the great challenge, and the protection of not becoming. I mean, some people love to do one genre or a time period and work within a time period, and I think that's great. I personally, I'm just too antsy. I need to I can get. I'm afraid of getting stale in one genre. Which is hard. Whether you, regardless of what you're doing, if you're doing a fashion story or if you're doing a futuristic story, there's always the danger of repeating yourself. But fortunately, also for me, I've had amazing, amazing writers, producers, directors to work with, and a lot of I want to say a lot of the projects that I have worked on that are in the same time frame or same genre are written different enough that, and the characters are very well fleshed out on the page, that I can translate maybe the same time period but in a different way.
Sure.
I mean, I feel a little grand saying that. I'm not sure. I mean, I hope that's what it's looking like. But I think Altered Carbon and Snowpiercer are a really good example because I did season 2 of Altered Carbon,
Yes.
and Foley did season 1. So, and that was thank you, Anne. And although we were on different planets, different characters and different look, she still sort of set the scene, that set the tone, which was amazing. But the danger was, going right from Altered Carbon to Snowpiercer was like, we have EVA suits, we have this, we have that, all these things in common. But the good thing was the scripts were different enough that the function of the suits was different. So, you can take that, the function of the suit, because you really always, I think, should investigate what that costume needs to do, because that just informs you so much. That I think that was okay. I think the worlds were different. One was in space, one was on a train. Sure. There was that difference as well. There was a show that I actually did turn down 2 years ago because I felt it was too close for me to Lemony Snicket. And
okay.
I felt that I couldn't do it justice. At the end of the day, great script, great show. It's doing really well. I think it's going into its second season now. So, but I just felt maybe it's because also Lemony Snicket was such a big part of my life and for so long, and so ingrained that, I just didn't think I could separate myself enough from it to.
Well, it's interesting that you recognize that, that's something that because a lot of people might not do that and take the job anyway. So.
Well, yes. And perhaps they see enough separation to be able to, do both shows justice. I just felt like it was too close to me for Lemony Snicket. It's still such a big part of me. And I didn't feel like I could separate myself enough.
Sure.
To give enough to the next project and
the design,
and be happy with it and have everyone else.
You did such a great job on that show. It's what a great, and of course, what's really interesting to me is like both with Lemony Snicket and Altered Carbon, you had season 1, and Snowpiercer, there was a feature film. Did you ever go back and look at the things, like did you go back and look at Snowpiercer the movie, and did you go back and look at Jim Carrey and Lemony Snicket, or do you separate yourself from that because you don't want to be influenced by what came before?
Exactly. And I want to say that I did look at Snowpiercer, the feature film, which was amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. I was very excited for that. That's what drew me to the project. Of course, when I got to the project, it was like, we're not going to do anything like that. I was like, oh, damn. Because I felt like the feature film could extend into a series, a streaming series, almost in the same form that it was. So for me, that might have been maybe not as challenging, but it would have been challenging in different ways. Like how do we do this day to day over several years on stories that are expanding beyond what the film did? That's always the challenge. But yeah, so it was very different. I think very different. It looks very different than the film. For Lemony Snicket, I didn't watch it, and I did that on purpose because when I still at the beginning when I went in for my interview, I brought some illustrations that were amazing, and they had a nod to the film. And when I met Barry Sonnenfeld, he said, "These are beautiful, but I don't want to do that." And I was like, "See, should have listened." But I should have listened, but I didn't. But he gave me the opportunity to come back and say, you know, do a second pass and come back and tell me, show me what you, and then how are you going to translate this? And every book needs to look slightly different. The children need to evolve, the adults devolve, blah, blah, blah. And it worked out.
Well, there are two other things I want to talk to you about before we jump into The Last of Us. One of those is Resident Alien. And Resident Alien is such a great show. And, you're dealing with an alien wearing essentially a man's skin, and you really create a comedic exterior for this alien. And it's so well done, and it's hilarious. Now,
thank you.
How did you begin when you're working on a show like that? Do you bring something in that you already have a vision? Do you work with the actors on a show like that? Because obviously, the lead, Alan Tudyk is so funny in that show.
I was going to say, there you go. That's it, Alan. He comes in. It's how do you sell a series like that to someone like Alan or any actor really, and say, okay, we're going to do this based on a comic. It's going to be a little bit cheesy, but it's going to be kitschy great. And you have to be this alien, plus you have to be somewhat bad guy. You're a bad guy basically. But then there's these relationships, and there's kids, and there's everything, and you got to wear like an alien suit. Like how do you sell that? And Alan just nailed it. All of the body movements are him, except when it's the full-blown alien, like the 20-foot tall alien. It's sort of animated, and but everything else is him. And what was great about it, he took the alien movements and brought it into his human form, and that's the beauty of it. That's the connectivity, but that's also the beauty of his transformation into everyday small town America.
So I'm curious, when you're working with an actor like that, you have a dance background, so you really know how fabrics are going to move across the body.
Yeah.
But Alan is kind of doing his alien dance in that show. So when he's doing his portrayal, did you guys work together to come up with that wardrobe? Did you pick fabrics that might work better based on what he was going to be doing as an actor?
Yes and no. The no of it is for us and for him, I think the restriction of human clothing on a human body that's actually an alien and still sort of sees himself as an alien, it helped. Like there's one great scene, I think it was in one of the trailers for season 1, where what is he doing? He's either going to take a drink or something, or he's brushing his teeth or something, and he actually puts it to his mouth, and the whole thing breaks, like he bites the glass off. And sort of that kind of spoke to how the human clothes should restrict his alien form, which helps him to become more human in a way, or to mask his awkward movements while he's being a human in town. So you're right. So it worked the opposite than it would normally do. Whereas in War for Jet Li, that's when I really, really learned about gussets for movement. So I know this is a big segue, but for Jet, everything was about stunts,
Sure.
tumbling stunts, swords, everything. So he's like giant gussets in the diamond shape like that in his crotch, in his underarms,
Sure.
in everywhere that you need to move. There's a giant stretchy gusset that's not the same fabric as the suit, because it's usually a suit for him. And so that's the opposite of what Alan was doing or is doing, because the show's still going.
Sure. Yeah, of course. It is,
Yeah.
and it's great.
Yeah.
It's such a great show.
Yeah.
Well, another
Yeah.
film that I was actually kind of knocked out by was Swan Song. And I love that film. Mahershala Ali, Glenn Close, Naomie Harris, Awkwafina, and a great science fiction concept. But I really thought, your costumes for that film were not ostentatious, but they really went a long way toward show that we weren't living in our time right now. You had to give it sort of a futuristic feel, but at the same time, it still had to feel in the not too distant future. And you really conveyed, especially when you're dealing with one man confronting basically himself. That was a wonderful film. And what was your approach? How did you begin something like that? I mean, does it begin with the script with you, or do you create a mood book? How would you start on a movie like Swan Song?
So Swan Song I had a lot of prep on Swan Song because we started prepping it before COVID, and we had a long prep, and then COVID came. So then we had, almost a year to think about the show. So in all honesty, the show actually, for all the department heads, kind of in some way kept going. Don't tell my agent that, but somehow kept going, where we were still sort of, trading ideas and spitballing and things like that. So we had a long time to think about what made sense and what didn't. But for the costumes, it was always, I hate to say this, but it was always not about the costume. So it was about how do we show it's not a futurist. This is something I always say. It's set in the future, but it's not futuristic. That's the difference, because people always come to you as futuristic, and I think, Blade Runner or something. But it is not. It's set in the future. It still needed to feel familiar to us. We're still on Earth. We're still in neighborhoods that still operate the same way as neighborhoods. So, and we also had the very human story. The whole thing is about your humanity, your relationship with yourself, and what would you do if you were faced with this terrible, I don't want to give too much away in case people haven't seen it yet.
It's on Apple Plus if you want to see it.
It's on Apple Plus. And Mahershala, oh my gosh, what a dreamboat to work with. He's so, everybody knows him. I don't need to say too much about that, but he's a gentleman. He's smart. He's so invested in the character. He has ideas, which I always love. I love it when actors come to me with ideas, because I have ideas that are always coming to me from everywhere else. I have my own ideas. And then when you have the actor in the room and they're giving you the sensibility of what they are feeling for this character, it kind of helps to push away all the noise and just sort of bring in what feels real in the moment, and kind of work from a more succinct point and a more collaborative point, which I love. But yeah, it was really important because the science part of this movie is set away, but it's still set on Earth in a beautiful, natural environment. And that was the whole thing. The lab, if you will, needed to be set in something that was very, very organic, not futuristic.
Sure.
So that sort of, the tone of the whole movie revolved around a timeless quality, an approachability, so that if you were faced with this question, like this terrible question that you had to answer and how to move forward, you could kind of see yourself doing it.
Sure.
You could feel one with it, because it still looks like the world you live in.
Absolutely. Well, you guys did a phenomenal job on the film. I mean, it's a wonderful movie. I don't think enough people have seen, but it's Swan Song on Apple Plus. The Last of Us. Now, you had worked previously a while ago, not on the new Halo series, but the old Halo series. And now you have this other video game property come to you which is one of the most celebrated video games of all time, especially because of its storytelling. And
Yes.
were you aware of The Last of Us? Had you heard of it? Did you know anything about it? You said you had a son. Was he a gamer? Did he play?
My children knew about the game, but I did not. Just like Halo, I really wasn't that aware. And when Halo came to me, I said to my agent, really? Do I want to do this? And he's like, yeah, you want to do this. I'm like, okay. And he said, ask around. So I asked around regarding Halo, and my oldest son at the time was a big fan of the game, and he's like, yeah. And then, so similarly with The Last of Us, because I'm not a gamer, I don't know if I should say that out loud because, oh well.
It's okay. You're forgiven.
But
I forgive you.
The Last of Us came to me, and I, in my head at least, had the same question. Although I want to say I learned from Halo, and it was presented to me in a slightly different way, where, unlike some other video games, Halo is written like a script. So it's got great story and a lot of backstory, and there's a lot of range for this to be developed into a live action series. And I was like, okay. And then I met Neil Druckmann and Craig Mazin via Zoom, and I actually watched a few of the outtakes and some of the game stuff, and the one thing that got me was the actual humanity and the sadness that I felt for the clickers.
Really? You
Yes,
felt humanity
yes.
and sadness for the clickers, and that's what got you.
I did. You know, there's something that I watched, and there was I don't know what it was, but it was there was a clicker who got, because it's all echo, that's how they get around. There was a clicker stuck in a corner, and you could see the game player was over here and obviously was going to get away or win or something. And this poor, who used to be a lovely human being, this person who was taken over by this organic matter, was like blind, deaf, mute, the whole thing, stuck in a corner. And my heart broke. I was like, oh my God.
That's fantastic.
You're only trying to do what nature is telling you to do. And anyway, so that was because Craig Mazin had said to me at one point, it's a love story. And I was like, a love story? I don't get that. But that's what he was talking about. It's a love story to humanity, about humanity and for each other. And I'm not going to go on about that because everybody knows the game and knows all about it. But that's what drew me into it. And just the scope of it. And the scripts were amazing. The scripts are amazing, and they were, and the development of the scripts as we went along. I am so excited for this to come out. I am way more confident of this than I ever was of Halo. I've learned, game to reality. I've learned since then, but I'm so confident that this is going to be everything they say it's going to be.
Now, obviously, I mean, Craig Mazin coming off of Chernobyl, which is one of the great miniseries of all time. Yeah. And then Neil Druckmann, the creator of the game, were you given freedom in order to, I mean, obviously these characters for gamers are so iconic in terms of their look. Were you, did they give you any leeway, or did you have to skew pretty close to what we'd seen before?
So because on a smaller platform in storytelling, like a game, you don't, there's a story, and there's a natural storyline that they follow, but you don't get to, segue. You don't get to go off and have these other stories happen to this character along the way. When you're doing a live action, of course, you need to do that because you need to fill in the blanks. You need to make it look visually more broad and interesting and beautiful and voluptuous and everything. And so there were certain things that we needed to stay close to, like, also our story doesn't follow exactly the timeline of the game. it just can't, or things don't make sense. So we got to color it in a little bit, but we wanted to stay true to the things that we really felt would be important to the viewers and especially the gamers, which are things like Joel's jacket, his sort of nod to a Carhartt jacket that he wears throughout for most of the series. Some of Ellie's jackets, her shirts, her chucks, her red chucks, so pieces like that. Of course, I can't talk about that yet because it hasn't come out. But but yes, trying to stay close to some of the points that are important and then expanding on them. So building closets, definitely. And then there's, new characters or newish characters or characters that have more relationships sort of running, in their orbit. So that's where we got to be a little more broad, a little more interesting. And I just reminded myself, I can't talk too much about this because it hasn't come out yet. But being at the premiere and seeing it on the big giant screen was just so amazing. And I want to say that I'm really, really proud of it. I'm from a costume point of view, working so closely with the Gowers, Barry Gower, who did all those special effects makeup. My team worked so hard with them and so closely with them. We were talking about, how we created the clickers and how obviously the prosthetic pieces. Such amazing work. Oh my gosh, the bloater. Well, everyone's seen it in the trailers now, but that's all real. Those are all that's the biggest person they could find to be the bloater, and those are all people. That's all real. That's all I can say about that. And then all of the prosthetic that has to marry into the costume. We're looking at 4 to 5 fittings for one prosthetic piece to be married to the costume, because it would be us. And then we'd map out the pieces that we had to add. Then it would go back to makeup effects, back to my breakdown team or my aging and dyeing team. Then we'd have another one to see if it all matches, and we'd hum and haw, and this didn't look great. This is kind of wonky, so we'll do this and change this, back and forth, and right down to their finalized painting, our finalized painting on the costume and all the layers of stuff that we put on, and then gluing it all together. And
now you had a lot of
final touches on that.
You had a lot of people. I mean, this is a big show. It's not just two people
big
traipsing
show.
Through the woods. You've got the fall of civilization.
I
and
know.
So in terms of scope, was The Last of Us one of the largest things you've worked on?
So same producer on my very first show, producer on Last of Us, also was my producer on Lemony Snicket. And she and our first AD on Lemony Snicket, who also did The Last of Us, had said to me, think of Lemony Snicket, which was huge. It was 2.5 years, almost 3 years of just big, giant builds. But think of Lemony and just multiply it by, I don't know, 100% more. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? Because it's contemporary-ish, and there's creatures, and what else? But it's just the scope of it. The scope of it is, everywhere that Ellie and Joel, as in the game, travel, it's a new colony of people. It's a new people who have created a safe haven to escape everything that's going bad for the last 20 years in the world. And we do go around the world as well. And I just was like, oh, but I learned a lot. I didn't think I would. I mean, that's, but I didn't think I would. But working with makeup effects on this level, on this scale, and having things built in London, built in built in Calgary where we were shooting, and having people flying all over. And it just was a huge learning curve in so many ways. And it was so big. I had a team of 60 in my department. I had 7 sub-departments within my department. Wow. And then, it was and that's a massive,
that's not including. That's massive.
That's like a full-time
Yeah.
crew. So that's not all the people we're bringing in for our second unit days and our splinter unit days and our just, shooting 2 major episodes at the same time days. And yeah, I had people come in from all over. It was actually very exciting. And I've met so many talented people, costume people. It just blew me. Hi, everybody. It just blew me away. I really, and a show that size you come off of and you're just so wiped and you just are wondering and hoping everything is great because as you're whipping through all of these main characters and their stunt doubles and their 5 stunt doubles and then their stand-ins and their photo doubles that all in front of camera all the time in the snow, like we're talking minus 40 Celsius, and we're talking blistering summer heat and sounding like Game of Thrones a little bit, but all of these temperate areas and just masses and masses of people.
Well, like
Yeah.
with Joel and Ellie, how many
Exhausting.
How many multiples would you have for them?
Yeah. So with Joel and Ellie, that was the opposite end of the spectrum of many, like crowds of at least 300 to 500 people wherever we go. Those crowds are multiples of 2 if they were lucky, because the detail in their costume, the level of details and the layers in their costume were so great. We just didn't have time, to do more. Whereas Ellie and Joel traveled through over multiple episodes in the same
Sure.
costume. However, they're on the run. They're on the run across America, driving, horseback, running, crawling, everything you can think of. So, I want to say in one outfit may look newish. Nothing looked new, but new for us. And then you have to take into consideration all of those elements of where they are and where they've been and where they're going. So one outfit for, I would say, so if we're talking our hero, our actor, it'd be at least 10 just for them.
Wow. Okay.
In one way. And then every other point of breakdown they go through, 10 more for just Pedro Pascal in that look. And then they've got all their stunt doubles and then all their, as I said, photo doubles and stand-ins we just worked everybody that we could. So I don't know what the math on that
Right, sure,
is
but that's
anymore.
a lot.
I mean, even if you just did the traditional, okay, you've got your hero, your actor, and then you've got a stunt double and a photo double, that's already 30 of one look.
That's
So,
incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, we had 4 trucks working all the time. We had laundry on with us. We had a truck that was just laundry. And like a full trailer, like a 54-foot trailer that was just laundry. So, and we had a breakdown team, and then we had slush trucks all over the place. It was massive.
Because it's HBO, did that allow you to have the kind of budget you needed where you didn't have to worry about things because you had so much work to do? Was the pressure
Yeah.
off in that sense?
Yeah. Of all the shows that I've done that I feel like are my most successful shows, it is exactly that. And when we have the costumes for some production teams are not the main event, whether it's here or they just not understanding. It's often not the main, or sometimes not the main event. This show, like Lemony Snicket, like Altered Carbon and Snowpiercer, I want to say, and L Word, we were like number, I don't want to say what show, but we were like number 2 after Transpo. If you don't have Transpo, you
No.
can't get there. So, so we were number 2. So like before camera, before anything else. So when you have that kind of support, you can do almost anything. And you are, of course, like anybody, when you have that kind of support, you feel compelled to do it. You feel you can, and you feel compelled, and you feel like you've got the support. And so, yes, HBO.
Well, that's good to hear. Now, if you can say, so it's 10 episodes. Was it?
It's 9.
9 episodes?
Someone asked me that. I can't remember. It's 8
Okay.
or 9. Well, it's 8 or 9.
Can you say what the schedule was? Like, what were your budgeted, how long were you shooting per episode? Or was it all, were you block shooting or? Okay.
both. So it was, so we were on, I was there on the project for almost 15 months.
Wow.
Yeah, which is why if you look on my IMDb, there's nothing after that
Yeah.
to this day. Um,
Were you in
so it
Calgary
was
the whole
almost
time?
15 I prepped a little in Vancouver first, and then we shipped up to Calgary. I was there for 2 winters and 1 blistering summer.
Wow.
And yeah, uh, oh gosh, I've forgotten the question.
Well,
So
in
sorry.
terms of how long each episode was going to take, but 15 months.
Oh yeah,
I can
yeah.
back time
You
that.
can
I
do
can
the math.
extrapolate.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
if you
yeah.
could leave anybody with your experience on Last of Us, what would you impart to them from your design sensibility? What did you walk away from The Last of Us? Was it surprising? Did you learn something new? What did that experience mean to you and mean to your career?
You know what it meant to me was, and it started at the very beginning in the first episode, in the first block. I thought I knew what a dystopian future looked like, and I'm a big believer in building a village on mannequins for producers and directors and makeup and anybody who wants to take a look to see where we're going, which is what I did on this show, because like I said, every colony we went to, every town, every situation we got into was different, needed different overall patina, a different overall look, same kind of look but different, which is always hard, when you're able to do here or here, that's one thing, but if you have to do here and this is there but different, it's like, whoa, and do that do that 12 times. I learned that I don't want to give too much away, but the first place that I had to go to in a different dystopian future was the Boston QZ. And I went one way that I thought was what people would understand, the audience would understand. What I did see from all the reference, there's so much great information from the game. And then Craig had a look at it and said, no. And I said, oh, okay, well, what? Or what are you responding to? What? And he said, I don't know, but this isn't it. I was like, okay. So, total spin going in another direction and just sort of look and listen to what Craig was saying in between the lines, listen to what he was saying about maybe a reference to something he did at some point or something somebody else did, but had nothing to do with what I was actually going to do for him in the Boston QZ, but just listening to everything that I could, and then not being afraid, because what have you got to lose? Because what I did was not going to be what we were going to shoot. And I had no time to spend another 4 months creating the Boston QZ. So now I'm looking at 3 weeks or 4 weeks. And so now the pressure's on. And a lot of times that's when your best creativity comes out, because you can't second guess yourself. You gotta feel it, hear it, and go for it. And so that's what we did. And that was, I'm sure I've learned that on another show in another way, or maybe even the same way, but I wasn't listening to that. And I got out of my own head, I guess, and just kind of just did it. I just did it.
That's probably the best advice you could give anybody.
Yes. Yes.
Well, listen, I would keep you here all day long, but my hour with you, I feel like I'm a therapist, or you're my therapist. Our hour's up. No, more than that. But I wanted to ask you, are you on social media? Do you have an Instagram account that people can follow and see your work?
Yeah. It's just my name, Cynthia Summers.
Okay, and people can find you on Insta. And
at Cynthia Summers.
Do you post a lot of the work that you've done on your Instagram account?
I usually do. And once I got on to The Last of Us, it's crickets, and it's a lot of dogs, because I have dogs.
I do too.
Because we're on like a total lockdown to this day, and even post the show launching, of what we're allowed to
Of course.
share.
Well,
So,
listen, I very much appreciate
yeah.
your time. One last thing, there's a lot of
you.
people that
Yeah.
watch these shows and they want to know how to get into the business. If you could give some advice to young people just starting out that want to get into costume design or wanted to get into any kind of design work on film and television, what would you tell people? How should they begin?
I mean, if you're just starting at the beginning, yes, I would say go to school and see if film is for you. I did it a little bit unconventionally, a little bit self-taught, a little bit just all like jump in, which I think is really important. Say yes to anything as long as it's not, threatening you in any kind of way. But just be brave and say yes and just get there and have your ears and eyes open and just soak in everything. And, if you want to, I got a Instagram reply from someone, I can't remember her name, sorry, who had reached out to me at one point, and I said basically that. And she sent me a really lovely Instagram message and said, you know what, I took your advice. I started as a stitcher on some show. Now I've moved around, I've moved up, I've moved sideways. I'm having the best time. It was the best advice. And I think that's the best advice I could give is just take the opportunities where you find them. Don't be afraid to sort of do commercials, do an indie, do a short, do a friend's short film, those are the best places to really be able to sort of shine and show your ingenuity and your uniqueness, because that's important. Because like most industry, there's a lot of us and there's so much content out there. Just, I know it takes maturity and it takes time in the business to sort of have the confidence to just say, well, what about this? Where someone's asking for a beige scarf and you come up and say, what about that? That might be that's my experience with Craig. It was, here's what I thought, and it was no. And so now, how about this? Yes. So those are the golden moments, and those are the moments where like you lose sleep and you sweat, but just, it's also the magic. It's the magic of the industry. That is the industry in a nutshell. It's like, show me something. And you can't be afraid to show yourself, your creativity, and your what's coming from your heart.
Well, that is tremendous advice. Cynthia Summers, I can't tell you, we are very excited here to watch The Last of Us, which begins this week on Sunday on HBO. I mean, 15 months in Calgary. Wow. I think, again, one of the most eagerly awaited shows of 2023, starting in January. But hey, it gives us a good it's a good year. It's a good way to start. I want to thank you for being here on the Designing Hollywood podcast, and I really look forward to speaking with you again once I've seen the entire series, or at least season 1.
Yeah, let's do it. Yes, definitely. Yes, I love to be able to talk about everything.
Yes,
and I will be able to then. And I have lots, as you know, I have lots to say.
Well, thank you so much for being here.
Great, my pleasure.
All right, we'll see you again. And a special thanks to our sponsor, Paris Costumes. Paris Costumes has been a part of the history of the European theater, film, and television industry since 1856 and has become 21st century tailors. A special thank you to founder and executive producer Martika Ibarra, co-founder, costume designer, the legendary Marilyn Vance, and of course, John Campea from The John Campea Show. Our technical director is Taylor Gonzalez. Thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Tune in to the audio version wherever you listen to podcasts. I am, of course, your host, Robert Meyer Burnett, and you can find me on Instagram at rmburnett, or find me on Twitter at BurnettRM, or on YouTube at PostGeekSingularity. Thanks very much. Like, subscribe, and give us your comments. What would you like to see on the channel? Right down below. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode of Designing Hollywood.